So Steve, tell me a little bit about Convergence. This was a feature that you shot recently that you won a couple of awards for and is now available on Amazon Prime.
Okay, so Convergence is the story of an author called Martin who's struggling to come to terms with the death of his wife and young child. And through a bereavement group meeting, he meets the character Lily, and through that relationship he begins to question the true meaning behind his wife's death. As you can see, it's a very, very happy story, being based in Scotland, but it doesn't feature gangsters or zombies or anything like that.
So tell me a little bit about how that project came about.
I guess the crux of the story kind of started with me looking at different aspects of conflict. And for me, one of my worst fears, I suppose, would be losing my kids. Through one thing. So I guess that was kind of the crux of how would I deal with that, and I put my feelings and viewpoint into that of Martin. Likewise, the character Lily also comes from a conflicted background as well, given that she's in an abusive relationship as well. So it's kind of trying to give a strong female-male perspective on two different situations and how they are coming together.
And this was a film that you wrote and directed. So obviously, what was the kind of birth point for that? I mean, what kind of drove you to write the film in the first place?
It's one of those strange things, which is, where does creativity come from? And sometimes you just don't know. For me, it starts off with, like I said, the premise of, what would I go through if I lost my kids? And then you just start building on the story aspects of that. So I think that's kind of how that kind of came to be. And then you obviously start constructing the story, and then before you know it, you've got a 90-page script there. From that, you decide, okay, how are we going to make this? And certainly when you don't have any money, you need to be creative in terms of the production side of it. So that became a challenge, and then it became tweaking the script to a degree to fit locations you knew you could get.
And in terms of the actual production, you shot this on RED, and that was on your Helium DSMC2?
That was on my Helium, yes. So we shot in 8K on the Helium. So we shot in and around Glasgow for about 3 weeks in February 2018. And then we had a bit of a break, and then we travelled up to Aviemore, and we did a lot of the stuff with the character of the strategist and the lodge, and the end of the film all took place just up in Aviemore the end of April.
Just kind of tell me a little bit more about how many other people were involved in terms of supporting with lighting and obviously filming on location.
When you're making a no-budget feature film, you don't have the luxury of having big kit, big support team and what have you. So we ran with a crew of just 4 individuals throughout the entire film. So there was myself that was DOP, directing, etc. We had someone doing clapper, we had sound, and then we had a production designer on board to kind of do things like the wall and move things around and what have you. So that was kind of our regular day. On a big day, for like the bereavement counselling scene, we actually had a first AD in, and that was to deal with the featured extras that we were on. So, when you don't have any money, you can't make a big production. So we had to really scale things down. So we would look at opportunities to shoot by windows. It's the old guerrilla technique, shoot by windows. So I think overall we had one scene in the entire film that was actually lit by a movie light, and that was a panel light that was just outside a window for one scene.
And obviously shooting this on RED, a lot of people affiliate RED with Netflix productions, high-end feature cinema releases, very big budget productions. So you obviously shot a film with no money, with a minimal crew. Did you have any challenges using RED to do that, or was actually it a very sort of plain sailing, typical workflow that would translate from a small project like this to something with a bigger budget or to large scale? I
think the difference between shooting on RED, between no budget films and things like what may be shot on Netflix, is economies of scale. So you can look at some of those big productions and say, how is their pipeline? How do we streamline that? So we didn't have things like a network or anything that we would need to pass files. We would just offload files onto our RAID. So overall for our film, we shot just short of 16 terabytes of data. That was for the entire thing. And that is shooting 8K, that's shooting widescreen, and that's shooting a compression of between 8:1 and 5:1, which coincidentally is the Netflix specifications for anything that Netflix does on helium. So we abided by that because I knew I wanted to do a 4K output. So I wanted to make sure that, any possibility that presented itself on distribution, we could cater for. So, just offloading the footage, we ran 3 copies of data. We had 2 on slower drives. Our master drives were on a 16 terabyte RAID, and we just edited from that. And for our editing process, we edited on an iMac that was about 4 years old, using Adobe Premiere. But because we could adjust what we were viewing on our resolution, so we edited the 8K R3D files in real time and dropped the resolution to, I think it was a 1/4 resolution. And that's all you need, because you can kind of edit, and that's what we did for our 97-minute timeline.
Yes, I mean, that's the impressive thing. A lot of people would think, well, if I'm going to shoot a feature that's got a runtime of just over an hour and a half, to come back with just 16 terabytes of data that you can edit on, a legacy iMac at the time. If you're talking, this film was shot in sort of 2018, you're kind of talking about sort of, 2014 sort of tech. That's a very impressive feat, really. A lot of people, I guess, coming into RED or who are new to RED might have that misconception that shooting 8K and, kind of having all of that Netflix approved kind of specification in the recorded files actually would cause them challenges in post. But, from what you're saying, you didn't really experience any of those challenges.
No, and I think part of it was because I've had the experience over the years of working with RED. I kind of knew what I could and could not do. But again, it's just testing the workflow. So, we'd go out, we'd shoot a scene early on and just kind of put that through the pipeline, just make sure the iMac could handle it. Did we have enough RAM? Was the throughput? I mean, the iMac we were using was actually Thunderbolt 2, but our RAID was Thunderbolt 3. So by going from Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 2, we were actually maximizing that pipeline. So, we didn't split it into reels. We actually did one 97-minute timeline in Adobe Premiere. That's what we used at the time. We would then XML out of that and then bring that into Resolve, and we would do the finish in Resolve there. So, we could make sure, and again, XMLing out so we could send off the files to my sound designer, so he could work on all that and then bring everything in. It was just, if you test these things, which again is what Netflix would insist on doing, you can do that, but you don't need a big infrastructure in order to deal with RED files.
And you sort of said at the start of that one of the things that made shooting a low budget feature with RED kind of so accessible was your previous experience and knowledge of RED. So, is there a sort of very high level of importance on understanding the equipment that you're using, particularly with RED, when you are shooting a feature on a low budget? Are there some real kind of fundamentals that you need to understand before you undertake a project like this?
Yeah, I think it's the same on any camera system that you shoot, that you need to understand what the camera is capable of, what it can do in the highlights, what it can certainly do in the shadows, and what it can't do in the shadows. So, specifically with RED, it's about understanding, anything that is potentially underexposed, what is underexposed, using the tools on camera to understand that, and then thinking to yourself, well, if I do need to raise the exposure in post of a dark scene, then where am I going to potentially get noise, and how do I alleviate that? And taking 2 minutes on set just to use the tools on the camera can save you a huge amount of headache of having to run noise reduction software later on. So yeah, just kind of understanding the tools that you have available, especially on the RED.
So tell me a little bit about your relationship with RED historically. You're a RED authorised trainer in Europe, so sort of tell me when did that sort of affiliation with RED begin?
Well, I started out on Reducation. I think it was the third Reducation, which was in Los Angeles in 2009. And I went over there, I learned that was the RED 1 at that time, and then came back, kind of started getting involved, hired out in a RED 1 occasionally. And then I think it was 2011, Ted, who was working at RED at the time, he dropped me an email saying, listen, we're bringing Reducation to the UK for the first time outside Los Angeles. Do you want to come down and help out as a teaching assistant? So we came down, and that was just as the Epic was being launched. So literally, I'd never seen an Epic at that point. I came down on the Sunday evening, we were playing with the Epics, and on that Monday morning, we were teaching the students about these Epics, you know, straight on. So that was 2011. We did a couple more educations over the years there, and then in 2014, they asked whether I would produce some of their educations worldwide. So that was in places like Berlin and Singapore. So from that point, I started producing and then stepping in more into a delivery role. So really over the last 5-6 years, I've been delivering and teaching as well as producing the courses around the world.
So why did you first get involved with RED? What made you kind of choose to shoot with a RED camera for the first time?
I think it was, back in the days when the RED 1 came out, this was going to be a cinema camera that shot 4K. No other camera would do that. And it was like $17,500, which was, in the scheme of things, a steal, considering, you could go and spend more than that shooting on film those days. So I think that piqued my interest, and really going on their education course back in 2009, it let me get my hands on and understand the tech, and whether I could then go and make my own things on my own terms, and would that investment over the years kind of be cheaper for me to buy rather than rent the equipment. And that kind of really got me on that journey there. Then having played with the RED 1 and understanding how much flexibility and latitude there was in those digital files and being able to edit them, I didn't have to go off and rely on a film laboratory to go and process the film, the right way, the wrong way, who knows. I could be my own lab by actually dealing with those digital files. And from there, it just kind of took off. My first camera was the Epic, and then I've upgraded, I've had Dragon, I've now got a Helium, and whatever will potentially be next.
And going back to kind of Convergence and looking at that kind of run and gun style and that ease of just being able to pick up the camera and go, I mean, how much of the film was shot run and gun?
I mean, we scheduled everything on Convergence, so we knew what we were doing on each day, but we would run and gun, 75% of the film is actually handheld. It's nothing more than me holding in a DSLR format the Helium, pulling focus as I go. That's what most of the film is. For anything with the Strategist, that was a lot more controlled. That was a lot of they were on sticks, it was on a slider and things like that. But that was a creative choice for the characters there. But everything was run and gun. I mean, we went on the Glasgow subway, which we'd asked permission to film. We got a no, so we went and did it anyway. And the great thing with the RED camera being so small is we could sit there and I could press record and we could frame, I could focus, and it would just look like I'm holding the camera, but I'm actually getting certain bits of these shots. That for me is a great win, having something that's so small in the scheme of things compared to other digital cinema cameras, but being able to blend in inconspicuously, where no one's going to see you.
And talking about the kind of form factor of the RED, your Helium's a DSMC2 form factor brain, which is obviously a modular system. RED have their Ranger system out now, which is obviously a fixed configuration. And obviously the Komodo is now a shipping camera as well. So, given the options, say that you would have had a larger budget and some backing for the making of the film, how would you have envisaged using potentially any of the rest of RED's lineup to maybe shoot a few things a little bit differently, maybe adding some additional camera angles, etc., and shooting scenes? What sort of benefits do you see of the entire lineup that RED have now?
I think it is a multi-camera setup. So, a lot of people are looking at certain cameras of RED saying that's going to be my A camera, my B cam, my C cam, and yes, all the cameras in the range, everything from Komodo to Monstro through to the Ranger format or the DSMC format, any one of them could be a cam and could shoot a movie. Absolutely. I think you've got certain advantages, and I think that's what people need to think about. So Monstro is obviously VistaVision, it's large format, so if you've got access to those lenses, absolutely. The noise floor in Monstro is a lot better than maybe some of the other cameras. However, if you know that you're going to be shooting stuff that's low light and you don't have a massive lighting kit, maybe Gemini is the better solution for that. I think if at the time, if Komodo was out, then I probably would have done a lot more stuff on things like a gimbal rig, because the camera is so small, and it's easy enough to put on a handheld rig and deal with those, you know, walk and talk shots and things like that. Where what we did was literally walk backwards, and I had someone at the back of me to make sure I didn't fall over with the pavement, whatever. So, you know, I suppose they're all different tools, but they all complement each other in the right way.
Yeah, so how important is it, do you feel, certainly as a RED trainer and as a filmmaker, to really understand what you have in your hand and the complexity that it can offer you, but also the simplicity that it does provide when required?
I think there is a misconception with the RED cameras that they are difficult to operate and to understand. And they're really not. There is a couple of fundamental things you need to get right. And once you get over that, then yes, you can get into some of the deeper things. There's a lot of functionality within the RED that lets you do lots of interesting things. But for 95% of the people, they're not going to want to do frame averaging, frame summing, or necessarily time lapse or anything like that. But knowing what the camera can do will certainly help you from a creative standpoint.
And in terms of learning those things, how easy is it to get to grips with some of those more complex elements? Is it sort of something that's sort of fairly easy to learn but kind of takes a bit of time to kind of master, or would you say that, you know, the learning curve is actually incredibly easy and it's not steep at all?
It's not a steep learning curve. I mean, when we've ran the RED training courses that are authorised by RED, it's a 3-day course, and over that time you cover all the aspects. I think the most important thing is, how do you get your exposure correct? And I think that's the fundamental thing. So that's the thing that we tend to start with, and then we move on to the more complex or advanced modes on there. Now, things like the Komodo at the moment don't have a lot of those features on there, but that's because, you know, you are talking about a very, very, very small package, which is even smaller than, say, the Ranger or the DSMC2 range. But understanding what each of those cameras can do and afford you going forward, it is, you know, it's kind of important. I mean, we've had customers that have come onto the course and have spent time, and we've looked at all the benefits of what each of the cameras can do. So, for example, someone was looking at a DSMC2 camera. I think it was a Gemini at the time, and we were looking at the low noise floor, which, you know, between the Gemini, the Helium, and the Monstro. By the end of the course, they ended up upping their money and they bought a Monstro at the end of that, because they felt that from what they could see and the images that it was producing, that was the better option for them. You know, really between the Ranger is great. It's obviously started out as a camera by the rental companies for the rental companies, because they didn't want to add all the modules in. That being said, you can take a DSMC2 camera, stick a couple of modules on the back, and you get virtually the same functionality as what a Ranger does. But you can break things off, and you can, you know, so it might be easier to put a DSMC2 on a Steadicam than it is a Ranger. So again, thinking about how you're going to be using your camera going forward, I think is an important part of the purchasing process, especially when, you know, you only have a finite amount of finance. Yeah,
and talking about resolution, obviously it's come up when we've been talking about the different cameras and the resolutions that they're capable of. Obviously you shot Convergence in 8K, and you kind of talked about some of the options that gives you with delivering Netflix, Amazon Prime, all those kind of people. You're kind of ticking all the right boxes, but, you know, to you, what do you feel really does the shooting at high resolution actually bring to the footage that you get? There's a lot of talk, you know, about the extra benefits of resolution that it gives you. It's not just about a big canvas and ticking the boxes for kind of future proofing and being able to crop and downsize that deliverable format. You know, what else does shooting at a high resolution, you know, with your Helium, give you as a creative?
Well, I mean, you've mentioned the obvious ones, which is your future-proofing, your digital negative going forward. So, you know, at some point, I have no doubt that Netflix will make the switch and their UHD will be 8K. So we've got future proofing of that. Where it's helping me at the moment is if I do feel as a filmmaker where I don't have big budgets, if I feel that my exposure isn't exactly spot on and I am getting that little bit of noise at 8K, by the time I suck that 8K down to a 4K timeline, any noise or anything that's potentially going to be in there is actually going to get smaller as well. So actually I can actually feel like I can boost the ISO and get away with a couple of extra things with that, just by knowing that I'm going to take that 8K and edit it on a 4K timeline to get a better 4K output. I mean, it's like anything. If you've got a bigger canvas and you shrink that data down, your 4K will actually be a better 4K than if you shoot 4K for 4K, because you're oversampling. And taking that oversampling and bringing all that down will mean not necessarily it's going to be sharper, but your colors are going to be better, your noise is going to potentially be lower, and you can push things around a little bit more.
And the fact that R3D red code is a 16-bit format as well surely gives you a lot more kind of depth and latitude to be manipulating that information in post as well.
Absolutely, you know, for color grading, it's a no-brainer. I mean, the great thing is you can actually record ProRes or DNX at the same time. So if you don't have a system that can handle the 8K files or what have you, you can go back to that offline online situation and edit on a 2K proxy and then do a read link later on. But being able to have that container to go and grade in 16-bit RAW there, even if you don't feel you're going to need it, but by having access to all that data gives you so many opportunities later on in post-production and for making those creative decisions.
So we've conducted this interview remotely because of COVID. Obviously, we both can't be in the same room at this moment in time. But obviously restrictions are starting to lift, particularly here in the UK and obviously in other countries like the US as well. Hopefully that's going to roll out across more of the world. You know, what's kind of the future holding for you in the coming months and you kind of year ahead?
Well, the great thing is, obviously, yes, COVID is starting to be, the restrictions are getting lifted, which is absolutely great. I am starting to prep for a couple of projects later this year. I really haven't done any shooting for almost the last 18 months to almost 2 years now. So I'm itching to get out there. I'm prepping a couple of projects, both that I'm going to be DOP on and a couple of projects I'm going to be directing in the future. So, you know, I think it's baby steps at the moment to see how things go, but, you know, we're certainly kind of getting out there and hopefully we can conduct another one of these interviews in the future in the same room.
Yeah, that's the dream. So with restrictions lifting, and obviously you've got some forthcoming projects that you're going to be getting out and shooting, presumably you'll be shooting those on RED again?
I will absolutely be shooting on my RED. It's my camera of choice. I can see the benefits, I understand the benefits, and I would basically encourage anyone, if they're interested in understanding the RED infrastructure, to get hold of a camera, go and get some training courses, go and can understand what the RED can do for you, because actually it's a very simplistic approach and it can actually be easier than other camera systems that are available on the market as well.
That's fantastic. And with Komodo, again, that price point, that accessibility, you know, that camera was designed by RED as a crash cam for the likes of Netflix and big productions, but it's evolved into something much more and really can be an A cam for most sort of entry-level filmmakers or people stepping up, you know, from maybe using mirrorless cameras with like external recorders, or maybe they've just been using kind of like the entry level kind of pro video or cinema cameras from other vendors. But Komodo still gives you that same 16-bit R3D RED code and gives you that same kind of color science and workflow that obviously Gemini, you know, Helium, Ranger, you know, with the Monstros, etc., kind of gives you. So would you encourage people, you know, at all levels really to consider RED now, whereas previously it was only sort of more high-end users that would have maybe looked at RED?
Komodo is a fantastic camera. It's a brilliant entry camera into the world of dealing with RED. You know, when you look at the price point of some of the the editing systems coming down now, you can edit 6K Komodo footage, I think, on an M1 Apple Mac Mini, which is unbelievable now. But you know, you get, as you said, you get access to the 16-bit RAW. You can deal with R3Ds. and you can start to understand that at a price point that is unbelievable. And you can, again, it is adaptable. You can throw PL lenses on, EF lenses, RF, there's any number of things. And there are some big productions that have started using Komodo as ACAMs. I mean, we know it's been used on The Matrix. I think Steven Soderbergh has been using it as an ACAM. Michael Bay's been using it on some of his stuff. So it is certainly a mainstream camera at such a low price point. Anyone can now get hold of a RED camera and just go out and start making cinematic movies.
That's brilliant. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated, and I wish you all the best for your forthcoming features.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.